Welcome to The Straight Edge, the podcast where we cut through the noise to build a stronger community. I'm Bill, your host, and together with my wife Denise, we'll be diving into conversations that matter.
We're here to share stories, explore different perspectives, and have some fun along the way. From local stories to broader topics, we've got it all covered.
If you're looking for genuine conversations and a sense of community, you're in the right place.
Join us as we embark on this journey together.
This is The Straight Edge. Let's get started. All right, what's up? I'm here with Jason Pye, you've been coming to us for how long? A couple years?
3 years.
About 3 years?
3
Wow.
years. Yeah.
Wow.
When I moved to the area, I started looking up barbershops because I didn't want to go back to like Great Clips or anything like that. Being originally from Georgia, I was getting my hair cut in a barbershop for a few years. So I wanted to find something similar. And I found you guys. You guys were relatively close, like within, I think I lived 4 or 5 miles from the shop. So came over here and
Awesome.
have been a customer ever since.
Nice.
Much to my fiance, soon to be wife's happiness.
Yeah,
She's very happy with the quality of haircuts.
absolutely.
And she's sitting over here nodding.
Yeah.
He's
Absolutely.
with you.
And congratulations to the two of you.
Thank you.
That's coming up what?
Saturday, February 8th. Yeah.
Nice. Congratulations.
Yeah. For some reason, she wants to marry me. So,
I found one to put up with me for 27 years.
I mean,
so-
you're way worse than
I
I
know,
am. I mean,
I know.
I do not know how Denise
And that's
tolerates you.
Yeah, that's why I love you too, Jason. Every time you come in, you compliment me. Tell me how much you love me.
I mean, you're literally Satan.
All right. So, Jason, DC, you're lobbyist, so on work.
Yeah.
Works. I know you told me you worked for them for a while.
Yeah, so I've been working in DC for about 12 years. My longest tenure job in DC was at an organization called Freedom Works, which is sort of a libertarian, fiscal conservative nonprofit. I started out there as just like a backbench policy analyst and then became director of communications after about a year. And then after about a year of doing that job, I was promoted to the head of our public policy part of the organization. And then within like 6 months, they made me a vice president. I was vice president for legislative affairs, which meant I was our lobbyist on Capitol. I mean, I was already doing that job anyway, but with just the VP title made me, an executive at the organization and just lobbying on behalf of the organization on our big issues and everything from fiscal issues, budget and appropriations to civil liberties issues to criminal justice reform. I've worked on I'd say when I was at Freedom Works, probably about a dozen bills that became law, and then probably only a few since, because when I left Freedom Works in the aftermath of January 6th, I wanted to do bipartisan work. So I went over to a place called the Due Process Institute, where I've been since March of 2021. And I've only a few things I've worked on since joining Due Process Institute have become law. But I've also I have like other employment too. I went back to Freedom Works for, I don't know, like 8 months until we shut down the organization in May of last year, and then started a new organization called the Independent Center, not connected to Freedom Works. Couple of us worked at Freedom Works, but it's something entirely different, where we're trying to appeal to sort of disaffected voters who are unhappy with the political state of the country and frustrated by it. Trying to speak to them, get them engaged, because our polling has found that most independent voters are really centrist, but we don't mean centrist in the Mitt Romney, Susan Collins, Joe Manchin way. We mean
Right.
what they are is they're socially tolerant, or socially inclusive. They don't care what you do in your bedroom,
Right.
but they want lower taxes and less spending and less government involved in their lives. So they're fundamentally what we would call classical liberal. Some people would use the word libertarian, but they're not adherents to libertarianism like people who are involved in politics are. They're soft libertarian, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
It's sounding kind of basically describing me to some degree.
I think I think it describes a lot of people.
I think it's about 80% of the population, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of people who, I mean, I'm getting my hair cut today the day after the imposition of 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico, which are going to have a negative impact on the lives of everybody. And, here we are, we're entering into a trade war. It's that sort of economic intervention in the economy that tends to make life harder for people, makes things more expensive. And, it's going to have it's going to put upward pressures on inflation, and the Fed's going to start raising interest rates again. And that's going to make life more unaffordable. People want affordability. And what we've seen the past, really since the pandemic, is that every step in, whether that's housing, whether that's food prices, whether that's, the stuff we buy from Target or Walmart or whatever the case may be, life is getting harder for people, not easier. And not to mention the constant uncertainty that surrounds our politics. And I think that's also a big part of it, is this sort of hyper partisanship we're seeing in our politics, where everything's a show, everything's, political entertainment. Politics has turned into sort of like a WWE soap opera.
I mean, we've talked about it in the past, like a lot of those people just grandstand to just try and get camera time too.
Yeah, I mean, that's
just
100%. You've got to turn off, like, there are people who are in Congress, and this is not going to come as a shock to anybody. There are people in Congress who are simply there to get their name out there, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, for example, from my home state of Georgia. Lauren Boebert, a few others, like, they exist. Matt Gaetz was another example of this. They exist solely to get brand recognition. They want their name as a brand, because they're not thinking about what they're going to do in Congress, because they don't care about passing laws at the end of the day. What they care about is what they're going to do after they get out of Congress. They care about raising money and then influence with the base of their party. The fringes of American politics don't pass laws.
No, they don't.
No.
On both sides.
Oh, yeah, that's true. And I pick on those three because Republicans have the majority in the House, but and the majority in the Senate. But, I could easily say the same about some Democrats too.
Absolutely. That's the thing, that so most of us, I believe, we're just tired of saying, I'm a live and let live kind of guy. Do what you do. You do you, as long as you don't harm anybody else.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
But definitely want the government out of my pocket and out of my business, out of everything.
Yeah.
And we want fiscal responsibility. So
I've operated under being someone. I don't have as much time as I used to read political philosophy, but I used to read. One of my favorite philosophers is John Stuart Mill, who wrote a book called On Liberty. And John Stuart Mill, I know both Emily, my fiance, and I both have copies of that book in our libraries at home. But John Stuart Mill talked about something called the harm principle, and it's essentially, the harm principle comes down to, like, the government has no compelling interest to tell me what I can do, as long as I'm not harming the sovereignty or the rights of my fellow citizens. Which is, I've adopted that as part of my personal political philosophy, which is why I call myself a classical liberal, because I tend to identify more with the notions of liberty and enlightenment and reason that came from the founding generation. But there are also certainly, philosophers and others in the 19th and 20th century who, I strongly identify with, people like Karl Popper and F.A. Hayek and Milton Friedman and others who I strongly agree with on various issues. But I think people need to stop worrying more about themselves and less about their fellow man, regardless of political views, religious views, or whatever the case may be. If it ain't hurting you, shut up.
Yeah. And that was part of one of the things why we wanted to start this podcast as well. It's just to bring this sense of community back. Nobody talks to anybody anymore.
Yeah.
If you don't think like I think, then we can't talk.
Yeah.
And there's times you and I talk. I don't always agree with whatever you say. You don't always agree with what I say.
Right.
But I still love you.
Yeah.
I always look forward to you coming in.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Wait, was you
you
texted me because I missed my not my last appointment, but the appointment before last, because I had my nieces were in town. I had just had 2 straight weeks of my family in town visiting me, and Emily and the kid trademark, and I was just exhausted and completely missed the appointment. And then next thing I know, like a week or 2 later, you're like, "Hey, you coming back to seeing us? You okay? Everything all right?"
Yeah.
Like, no, I screwed up.
No, I love talking to you, especially when we get into some of that fiscal stuff, because
Oh yeah.
I know you geek out on it yourself. And
Oh,
I'm
no.
like, listen, I listen to what you have to say, because I do my own research as well, and I just
But it's
Yeah.
enlightening.
Yes, but
I
w-
love it.
I-
I love the discussion.
there's a like whenever the CBO puts out a report, the Congressional Budget Office, whenever
Yeah.
they put out a report I want to read, I'm like, nobody bother me for like the next 4 or 5 hours because I'm going to be sitting here. I don't read the report. I look at the data because the data tell the whole story. And I actually noticed last night that CBO's finally updated their 30-year budget number. So it's like, oh, well, I got to look at that before Thursday because Thursday's when we're leaving to go down to the location where we're getting married. So it's like, man, I've got a ton to do next week and a limited amount of time to do it. But I definitely need to look at those numbers because I want to see how screwed we are because we are on a very bad trajectory.
Extremely bad. And that's like most of us, everybody who has a half a brain knows that it's not Democrats, it's not Republicans, it's been the federal government by and large.
Yeah.
Both of them contributed.
Well, it's I hate the term. I see the term a lot. It's the uniparty. And I hate that term because it's being used in particular about like Ukraine and I'm a very staunch supporter of President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people, and my next door neighbor is Ukrainian, but the people I stay with up in DC when I go up to DC, there's a married couple, the wife in that relationship's a Ukraine was born in Ukraine. You wouldn't know it to talk to her, but she has no accent whatsoever, but she's Ukrainian. And, this is a country that was getting picked on by an authoritarian, oppressive regime like Putin. And I swear to God, I'm a child of the 80s and 90s. I thought we hated the Russians, but, I didn't know that
When I first joined I joined the Air Force right out of high school.
Cold War.
During the Cold War, like Reagan years. You know what I mean? I joined to defend my country against Soviet aggression. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
No, I mean, and so, but there's truth, that you look at federal spending and the most recent numbers, and like 26% of federal spending is what Congress argues about every year. We call that discretionary spending. About I don't remember the exact percentage off the top of my head, but we'll say 45 to 48% of that is defense spending. The rest of that is non-defense discretionary spending. And then, so again, that's 26% of all federal spending. So what about the other 74%? Well, 60% of that, 60% of federal spending is mandatory spending. That includes Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, SNAP, veterans benefits, civil and military retirement, a ton of different programs that are all on autopilot and what's spent is dictated by the number of beneficiaries in those programs. And then the remainder is interest on the national debt, which is steadily growing. And let me put it in even more real terms. 49% of all federal spending is Social Security and Medicare. The top 5 programs or the top 5 spends of the federal government: Social Security, Medicare, interest on the debt, defense spending, and Medicaid. That is 78% of all federal spending. So it's not, because I keep seeing people say like, well, if we spend less on defense, we can afford more things. We don't spend in context that much on defense.
Right.
It's a $7 trillion budget. We'll spend
$860
billion on defense this year.
So part of where the cynicism or the skepticism comes in, I might have to. How many the DOD has failed their financial audit?
7 years in a row.
Yeah. And
No.
and it's not like a dollar or two. It's, it's significant amount.
No. There was a Washington Post had a report, back pre-pandemic. It was like 2017, 2018, where they said they couldn't, like they spiked a report internally that found $125 billion in like wasteful spending.
Yeah.
And like nobody wants to touch it because nobody wants to piss off the contractors. And I understand that. But are there places to cut in defense? Absolutely. But even if you find or cut $100 billion or worth of waste or more from defense, you're still looking at a $1.8 trillion budget deficit this year. Even if you cut out all the waste, fraud, and abuse in Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, you're talking about $125 billion. You're still looking at that point, if you do both those things, you're still looking about $1.6.5 trillion budget deficit. To address the problems that we have from a fiscal perspective, you have to modernize programs that were created in the 30s and the 60s. So that means Social Security and Medicare. You keep benefits in place for people who are currently getting them. You don't change it for them, and people who are going to be on those programs in a reasonable amount of time. But for people like me who are 20 years away from retirement, it's not going to be the same program.
If it's even there.
If it's even there. Well, and that's the thing. I mean, people don't realize Social Security, the Old Age and Survivors Trust Fund, is scheduled to be depleted in 2033. Now, that means one of two things. It means either there's an immediate cut in benefits that the trust funds at that point will only be able to pay 77% of scheduled benefits, or Congress bails them out, which just further increases deficits and debt. The most likely scenario is the latter, not the former, because nobody's going to let benefit cuts take place. And the same is true of Medicare Part A, the hospital insurance trust fund, which I know what it is, but Robert F. Kennedy Jr. doesn't know what it is, because he apparently got Medicare Part A confused with something else the other day during his hearing. But Medicare Part A is scheduled to see, will only be able to pay out 90% of benefits come 2036, I think. So it's not looking great. And these are programs that are, I mean, when Social Security was created, you had something like 40 workers for every beneficiary.
Right, that's the problem. It's become top heavy.
Yeah, now you have 2.3 workers for every beneficiary. So it's become a Ponzi scheme. And it's not to say that we have to take care of the people who that's all they have.
Mm-hmm.
And people who are current beneficiaries. Again, but it has
My
to be,
dad,
yeah,
actually.
it has to be means tested. We
No,
have
I
to
agree.
we have to reduce the cost of living increases. We have to figure out ways to make the program viable, not just for the beneficiaries who will be coming into the program, but also for the sake of the fiscal health of the United States, because we're heading down a path right now that when we hit bottom, it's going to be way worse than what Greece experienced, or what they're in its sovereign debt crisis, or what France experienced, or what Spain experienced. We're talking about the dollar being removed as the world's reserve currency. We're talking about interest rates shooting sky high, because on you look at interest rates on the 10-year Treasury as sort of the basis of the yield for what people are, what the yield is for them to buy our debt. It's about 4.5%, which is very high. That's having upward pressure on mortgage interest rates, which are around 7% right now. Like, this is going to get worse if people question the ability of the United States to pay back its debt. This is the logical end conclusion, and nobody really knows when it's going to happen. But when we fall, we will fall hard.
Oh, well, so some of the people I follow and something like that, but they've all but acknowledged that a reset is about the only thing it's inevitable. It's going to have to be basically a crash, kind of it's going to take a major
reset.
I mean, you had a reset the way the federal government approached things after the stock market crash in 1929. The federal government was not a large federal government in the stock market crash throughout Hoover's administration. When FDR came in, he's the one who really remade the federal government and made it into, he laid the structure for what it is today. It was the Social Security Act of 1935, and then LBJ had the Great Society, which created Medicare and Medicaid. And those are programs that may have worked then, but aren't working. I mean, there has to be and whether we need another situation where we sort of start from scratch, I don't know. I don't know if that extreme is what's necessary. You look at some countries like Switzerland and Germany, which obviously Germany has a very generous social insurance program, while also basically carrying Europe on its back. But they also have a debt brake in place that keeps their sovereign debt relatively low. And Switzerland has the same thing, which in Switzerland's voters passed that by ballot initiative back, several years ago, back in, I think, the early 2000s. Unfortunately, the United States just doesn't have as well informed society as the Swiss.
I mean, people, me included, we're not taught about it, the financial system
No.
or anything like that.
No, because we're talking about everything else.
Yeah,
We're talking about the distractions. We're talking
absolutely.
about DEI and trans issues, which are designed to both, one, divide us,
Mm-hmm.
and two, to distract from the bigger issues that we face as a society.
Absolutely.
And regardless of your opinions, and look, I've already established, like, I'm socially inclusive, I'm socially tolerant.
Mhm.
I don't care what people do, but focusing on those things as though they are major issues that actually matter in the grand scheme is really kind of stupid when we're facing what is, whether we're 10 years away from it, whether we're 30 years away from it, an almost certain economic collapse if we don't get our stuff together.
That's what I'm saying. It's inevitable, basically. It's unsustainable the way we're going.
No, I mean, the CBO says by the end of the 10-year budget window, we're going to be spending $10 trillion a year, and we're going to have a budget deficit that exceeds $2.5 trillion. That's not sustainable. And that's in the next 10 years. That's, like, and you go back and I spent some time going back and looking at old CBO used to they would release their 10-year budget numbers or long-term budget numbers, and then they would release an alternative fiscal scenario. And everybody always said, well, the alternative fiscal scenario is just so extreme. And the difference between the two is the regular report it operates based on current law. So if current law says the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, for example, is going to expire at the end of tax year 2025 or the end of this year, then that CBO is going to take that into consideration, and then they're going to project upward the revenues for the years after. Okay, yeah, but behavior of Congress was what the alternative fiscal scenario tracked, and the behavior of Congress showed 10 years ago or 15 years ago, when one of the reports I looked at, it said that we were going to be seeing budget or the national debt or the share of the debt held by the public at about 105% of GDP. We're about 99 to 100 right now. And the reports that were based on current law showed much lower levels of debt, about half that. So we see that the alternative fiscal scenario was not necessarily completely accurate, but much closer to reality than
You think, right?
than the regular report based off current law. And we're seeing estimates that in the next 30 years, we're going to have levels of debt that are approaching 200% of GDP. That's not sustainable. And the United States, because of its standing in the world as an economic superpower, we might have more elasticity than Japan or other countries that run levels of debt that high. But do we want to risk it? And two, you also have to take into consideration other things that are happening in our society. Like, we're growing older as a society very, very quickly. CBO also just recently published a report on age demographics in the United States. The previous report, released in January of last year, said that we would not start seeing more deaths than births amongst the native population until 2040. Well, CBO's new report, released in January of this year, revised that down to 2033. So what CBO is telling us is the native population of the United States, more people will die than be born beginning in 2033. And the only increase in population from that point forward would be some immigration. But here we are, immigration's being demonized. Our society isn't replacing itself. You can't have an economy. One of the great myths of sort of the neo-Keynesians of the late 20th century and the early 21st century is that we can drive aggregate demand and spend our way into prosperity. Consumption matters, but it doesn't matter if you're not producing it.
Exactly.
And if you don't have production is how an economy drives itself. So if you don't have production and you don't have people for businesses to hire, and we're already seeing in November of 2024, for example, there were 950,000 more job openings than people looking for work. you can't drive an economy like that. You can't produce like that. So you're setting up where you're setting up the scenario where you're getting into economic lethargy. And it's a huge problem that no policymaker wants to pay attention because they think we can grow our way out of economic problems. We don't have the population for that. We did in the 2000s or the 90s. We don't have the population for that in the 21st century.
Right. And a lot of it comes back down to low, like you say, the birth rates are so low right now.
Yeah.
Anyway, is at 1.6.
1.6.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it used to be 2 point something.
So you need
Close to
2.1
3.
you need 2 births per woman just for society to sustain itself.
Right.
And so the CBO projects that we're at 1.6 and we're going to stay at 1.6 for the foreseeable
So
future.
why is that happening?
Well,
Well,
that's just the society today.
well,
Right.
there are various reasons. I mean, it goes to everything through from affordability, the cost of having children. That's a big one. The efforts in the 80s and 90s to stop teen pregnancy are a big one because you've seen the birth rates amongst that age group just take a nosedive.
Right.
That's a good thing. I don't consider that a bad thing.
I
It's a
agree.
good thing. But
Mhm.
people are waiting till longer to get married, to have kids, and that's part of it.
Well, I saw that. So I'm Gen X, whatever. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I saw some of my classmates who are having kids. Like, I don't know. I think some of them may even still have some that are in school. You know what I mean? Like mine are all out of the house. I see people are having elementary school kids. Like after
Yeah.
mine
Oh,
was kind of
Waiting to
Emily,
have children.
They waited
Emily-
so long to have kids.
Emily and I were, and my sister, because we talked to my sister last night on the phone. We were talking about that. My sister's got 10 years on me, and I was talking about how my junior or senior year in high school, there was a girl in my English class who got pregnant. I mean, she had one or two people she knew who got pregnant. I think she was in her senior year. She got married after she graduated, but she was pregnant during the latter part of her senior year in high school. My sister was. So, but there was a concerted effort in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, early 2000s to end teen pregnancy. And, and one thing I'll say also, I mean, and this is completely subjective and I have no data to back this up, but I would suggest that one of the reasons, and I think I've told Emily this before, one of the reasons that I think kids or people in high school, or as they've gotten older, stop having kids or having as many kids is because it was always planted in our heads or hammered in our heads that kids were bad. You don't want to have a kid because you're not gonna be able to go to college, or you're not gonna be able to get that job you want, or you're not gonna be able to do fun things that you want to do. I certainly, that was my takeaway.
Well, remember they have those programs like girls have to tear around that doll or whatever for.
Mm-hmm.
I remember
to.
I remember in the purity culture of evangelical Christianity, we had True Love Waits was a program that was popular when I was in middle school and I think early high school. That was, you make a commitment that you're not gonna,
Yeah.
premarital sex until you're married. You're waiting until you're married, all that stuff, and
That doesn't.
no, it doesn't work.
'Cause
No,
that
it
was
doesn't
the
work.
same with
But
me.
it leaves a lot of kids who went through that stuff very traumatized.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I was
I was a teen pregnant.
I think purity culture of evangelicalism was way worse on girls and women than it was on boys and early adult men. But yeah, I think that has a lot to do with it too, especially where I grew up in Georgia.
I grew up in Utah.
Yeah. You guys,
I'm with you.
yeah. But no, I mean it's doing what I get to do is fascinating. I get to meet a lot of wonderful people, and I get to meet a lot of people who I would as soon never meet again. But there's always great things that happen, and recently I worked with the family of Ross Ulbricht, who was granted a pardon by the White House. So, which was, seeing Ross get that, be free after serving 11 years in prison was, and look, I'm not,
And for those who probably may not know, I mean, he's not like a household name for a lot,
No.
but he was the creator of the Silk Road
right.
website for.
Yeah, Ross created the Silk Road, a very idealistic libertarian who just believed people had a right to choose, and so people could go on and purchase fake IDs as well as drugs. But Ross got caught. He was prosecuted. He was given 2 life terms plus 40 years, despite the fact that, like, Ross never directly hurt anybody. So, but Trump had promised to give him to grant him clemency on day 1. He actually waited until day 2, and he took it a step further by giving him a pardon, which I did not expect. But, I got to talk to Ross last week, and that was great. Just seeing him happy, seeing his wife happy, and seeing him free. Because I don't use this term lightly, I think, but I do think Ross was, in some regard, a political prisoner, just because they wanted to make an example out of him, which is why he got 2 life terms plus 40 years, despite the fact that he wasn't a violent offender. That people have said that people have made reference to some supposed hits that Ross put out, but I have a letter from Curtis Green, showing that who was one of the guys who Ross allegedly wanted to have a hit put on, supported Ross's clemency. And Ross emphatically denies that. He owns everything else, but he emphatically denies that. But it's good to see him free. And, and we'll see what happens. I mean, I'm there are things happening right now, and here we are 2 weeks into the new administration. There are things happening that I'm very concerned about, like, a trade war and some of the violations of constitutional norms, like Congress allocates spending and says how that is spent. That's a basic Article 1 function. And then the president in Article 2 is supposed to take care to execute the laws. And, I see a lot of undermining of Congress happening right now, and that's concerning to me. But I'm hopeful that things will turn around. I'm not holding my breath, but I'm hopeful. But there may be some, potential for movement on criminal justice in this year. I don't know. It's hard to say, but we're hearing some decent things on it, which is my big issue. I got to work on the First Step Act in 2018, which was a landmark criminal justice reform law, and got to go to the bill signing for that, and got to go in the Oval Office, which was really cool. And not many people get to say stuff like that. So, I'll show you the picture. I've been in the Oval twice, which that was the second time I got to go in. And I have this picture of me standing in front of one of the portraits on the wall behind Ted Cruz, sort of just because I was one of the worst. Like, I was just a lobbyist. Like, I would talk to the White House. The person who I largely worked with on that inside the White House was Jared Kushner and Brooke Rollins.
Okay.
So Brooke is going to be the Secretary of Agriculture, and then my friend from back home, Doug Collins, is should be confirmed next week to be the new Secretary of Veterans Affairs. So it's Doug Collins was the House sponsor of the First Step Act, which is why I mentioned him. So, it's been an interesting experience. I want to bang my head against the wall a lot, but it's been an interesting experience for sure. And of course, coming in here and talking to you guys, and this is the thing, like Emily and I talk about this. We were actually talking about this, what was it, maybe Thursday? I don't remember. One of the days where it's like people in DC live in this bubble. And they don't ever know what people who work in DC, people who live in DC
inside the Beltway,
they have this bubble where they don't ever get any feedback from people who actually live in the real world. And considering I work in DC politics, sometimes I, will stop paying attention to the world around me. And I have her as a check on that. I have you guys as a check on that.
Yeah.
And as well as other people too, who tell me when I'm being a DC asshole.
I've never started you being a DC, but
I mean, you just call me an asshole.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's why I love talking to you too. Like, one, I kind of want to, like you said, like, give you a perspective from like a small business owner outside the Beltway. How, like, what they're doing, and like I like from my talk, like talking to you as well, is like I kind of hear from you the thinking that's going on up there. You know what I mean?
There is no thinking that happens.
I use that term loosely, I guess.
I mean, you're dealing look, this is not to insult the people I get to work with in DC, but a lot of these staffers, I mean, these guys are, some of them in their most of the ones I've encountered in their mid to late 20s, and this is their first real job, and that life experience that you need isn't there. Yeah. And part of that's because there's been a lot of turnover and amongst staff in Congress, because for years, I know people don't have much sympathy for congressional staff or Congress. I get it, but those jobs don't pay much. And, especially for the cost of living in DC, it's a high cost of living.
Absolutely.
And, your staff assistant who's, usually fresh out of college is making about $45,000 a year. That might sound a lot to you, but it's not in DC.
No, it's not. It's not a lot to most people anymore anyway.
No, it's not. So when you have an exodus of staff that we've seen over the past like 10 years or so, you lose a lot of muscle memory, you lose a lot of institutional knowledge, and you get brain drain. And that's, because one of my favorite knocks against, two, actually, I'll go through two of my favorite knocks. Two of my favorite knocks. The first one is that you need to stop the Congress to K Street pipeline. No, you don't. For two reasons. One is a constitutional reason because government has, or people, the right to redress grievances is a protected constitutional right. Does it matter at all whether a group of people get together and want to pay someone to go and lobby for them? So that's issue number one. And then issue number two with this is members of Congress, like, no one should have their economic liberty restricted just because of the status of their former position. And I also say this to say, here's problem number two. Lobbyists aren't that powerful. You guys may think we are, we're not. Lobbyists lose more than we win. At best, a lot of times we're playing defense, not offense.
I guess maybe not so much lobbyists. I think that maybe there's a disconnect in the perception though. So basically what people see is it depends on the lobby as well, like how much your money that you're actually funneling into DC, right?
I mean, sure, but here's the thing. With lobbyists, you're trying to stop bad things from happening a lot more than you're actually trying to get stuff passed. Like you
said, there's all different kinds of people lobbying for all kinds of different things.
And if K Street had its way, this is my example of why K Street doesn't matter. If K Street was truly as powerful as people thought it was, Congress and the government would not be functioning how it's functioning right now, because those guys are pulling out their hair as much as I am. I don't work on K Street, but those guys are just as frustrated as I am, if not more so, because they have bigger paying clients.
I think, part of like where the discontent comes from me is part in particular maybe is a lot of what they're talking about trying to stop, and it's been brought up at some of these hearings though, people leaving positions in government and going to work for people that they like pharmaceutical, right? While proving drug, and they're going to give me a job.
I know people who worked on the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act who left and went and worked on K Street firms to help manage clients who were trying to navigate the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Yeah. I would argue the bigger problem is
like defense contractors who like generals approving like a contract for a new weapon system or whatever. And then going to work for Raytheon or Lockheed.
What I was going to say was it's not members of Congress leaving the Hill that is so much of a problem. It's more staff leaving the Hill.
Like you say, it's
staff leaving the Hill because they're the ones who actually write the laws. The members don't write the laws. The staff write the laws.
Oh, absolutely.
And
the staff writes it, or
leaving.
Somebody writes it for them and puts it in front of them.
Right. Them leaving and going to the Hill, that's the bigger problem. But again, I would still say you shouldn't restrict their economic liberty. But I would also add that they're pulling their hair out right now just as much as I am because of the state of politics. Nobody wants this, what we're seeing right now. Nobody wants this. Nobody who's actually trying to get something done wants what we're seeing right now. And when I say something done, I'm not talking about messaging bills that the House and Senate vote on. I'm talking about things that will actually matter to the lives of Americans. Nobody wants the hyperpartisanship we're seeing right now because all of us hate it. People
the general public hates it too. I mean,
the general public, I don't fault anyone who voted for Trump based on the economy in 2018 and 2019. I do fault MAGA, the people who are part of the cult of MAGA who voted for him because they're
extreme.
They're extreme, but I mean they're just as extreme as Bernie Sanders is.
Well, yeah, I'd say
they're just on the other side.
What was it? Exactly. Feel the burn. Those people were just anybody who follows anybody like a cult of personality like that is just sucks.
Yeah,
because there's things like I said. I don't even know what I am because there's things that
you're a disgruntled American.
I am. I thought it was the lesser of two evils.
Join the club. Emily and I are
You
also
know?
disgruntled Americans.
Because there are things that I don't even want to call them Democrats, Republicans, or whatever. But there's things that the Dems put up. Sounds good to me. Sounds like common sense. Sounds like a good idea. And but no, Republicans got to fight it, right?
Mhm.
Then there's things Republicans put up. Hey, that makes sense and help the people. That sounds good to me.
You know
Sounds like a
what's-
great idea. But no, but it's party lines.
What
Every
I
time.
would encourage people to do,
So
and I
it
realize
just
most
gets
people don't.
frustrating.
I realize most people don't know this. And look, the 118th Congress, which is the Congress that concluded in early January,
Right.
we're into the 119th, was the least productive Congress since like the 50s, or if not even further back. Congress.gov, which is where you can find these statistics, only goes back to like 52. But even still, like, most of the bills that this Congress passed were passed on suspension of the rules in the House or by unanimous consent in the Senate. Most bills that pass don't get roll call votes, or if they do, they don't have much opposition. There are this coming week in the House, there's going to
They
be
do that. What's it called? Like where they just move it through without a vote.
it's a voice vote.
Yeah.
In the Senate, it's called unanimous consent.
Right,
In the
yeah.
House, it's called a voice vote. But I mean, yeah, they just, sometimes there's a roll call vote. Usually in the House, if a couple members don't like the bill, yeah, there might be a roll call vote. 20 people will vote against it. It'll pass. It'll go to the Senate. It'll pass in the Senate by UC. The bills you hear the most about are the messaging bills, the bills that are controversial. But this coming week, I think they're voting on 6 or 7 bills. There are 2 what we call rule bills, which are messaging bills in some way, or bills that might have members from both sides, or primarily Democrats or primarily Republicans who are going to vote against it. And those take a simple majority to pass. And then there's the suspension bills, which often don't meet much opposition. There are more of those than there are of the other kind, the rule bills. So you're going to have 8 bills on the floor this week, 6 under suspension, 2 under a rule. The suspension ones, most of those will pass by voice vote, and you'll never know about it.
Wow.
Well, that's the thing. Like, that's what people don't like. You know what I mean? Like,
People don't know.
Yeah, because they don't know. That's what I'm saying. They don't like it because
But most of those bills are not controversial.
Right,
The
they're not,
the
and they're
suspension
usually
bills
not.
aren't controversial.
Not usually. But
It's the big spending bills, the 2,500 page omnibus spending bills,
Right,
whether it's
or it's the ones where they wrap up, they put a provision into some big, huge package and they just slip something into it.
that stuff usually goes to
And
the
that's
floor.
controversial.
And that stuff usually goes to the floor under a rule, which means it requires simple majorities. That stuff is the stuff you hear about.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's why, like, a lot of people are like, you hear starting to call for, like, single issue votes. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, one bill, one subject. We hear that a lot, which I would support. I mean, I think as a general rule, I would support that. The reason you get so many of these big bills with so many different things in it is because Congress doesn't work right now. Because these things are so polarized. They
well,
pack
it's that,
everything they
yeah,
can into one bill.
and They try to, they're trying to hide some stuff too. In the Senate.
Sometimes that's true, but sometimes that is true, and I'm not arguing that point. They do try to stick stuff in there they hope no one notices. But the reason you see so many big bills that are 2,500 pages or 2,000 pages or 1,800 pages, whatever the case may be, is because they can't get stuff through that would have ordinarily passed without much opposition for some reason.
But it's on the back.
Yeah, so it's on the back. It's not as pressing of an issue as other things, but I mean, let me give you an example. This bill that they were trying to move in December that Elon Musk killed, I actually had something in that. I mean, it was something I supported, that my organization supported in that bill. It's the Second Chance Reauthorization Act. That was not related to government funding in any way, but it was the only vehicle left to stick it in and try to pass it. And it got taken out because Elon Musk doesn't know what he's doing. He isn't. I'm sorry. The man, he might be a good businessman. I'm not
Yeah.
arguing one way or the other on that point,
Mhm.
but he does not know government, and government is not business. Government,
Agree.
Calvin Coolidge once said, an efficient government is a tyrannical government. And you're going to have a hard time making government more efficient because the Constitution itself is designed to make government
Absolutely,
less
to
efficient.
to make it inefficient in the sense, like, so nobody can just ram a whole bunch of stuff through.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't know. I think of the sentiment of most people. Like, I don't know. It's like, we've had a status quo up there for so long that hasn't served the American public. So
Yeah, but you keep voting the assholes in.
Who, me?
I'm not saying you. I'm just saying people like. Well, it's not just that you keep. It's not just you keep voting the same people in over and over again, and you keep expecting a different
Believe me, I
result.
agree.
Well, we
like,
switched
how,
Democrat,
why are there?
Republican,
Well,
Democrat,
yeah,
Republican.
it's
Well, and it's. I
you're-
will tell you, it's the. And we'll go back to even like George Carlin years ago. Basically, it's an illusion of choice.
yeah, exactly.
They're, you know what I mean, and it really is. I don't know. You know who Eric Weinstein is?
No, but I know who George Carlin is.
I know. Well, he kind of says the same thing. This is Harvard educated, like, or not professor actually, but just very highly educated, very smart guy.
Isn't he a scientist?
Scientist,
Yeah.
yeah. But he speaks a little bit on that. But basically, the reason of the two-party system and the way it is, it's so that everybody is vetted, so that when they get up to that, you're really not getting too much
Difference. Right?
difference.
There are a multitude of problems that I can point to, but let me go through a couple of them real fast. Problem number one is the primary system itself, the party primary system. These primaries are generally publicly funded. Now, I know Virginia is a little different in how it does it. Sometimes there's a primary, sometimes it's at convention. I know Glenn Youngkin got the Republican nomination at convention, but I also know that, like, I voted for Rob Whitman in my party primary and for Congress. So, but the primary system is designed to be a race to the bottom. You're basically getting the person who will say the most outrageous stuff to get the nomination for that party. Generally speaking, it's not universally true, but that ultimately is what winds up happening. That's how you get Marjorie Taylor Greene. That's how you get Lauren Boebert. That's how you get AOC. That's how you get all these other politicians who we look at and we're like, wow, you're crazy.
Yeah.
So if there are alternative ways of doing this, whether it's ranked choice voting, which is my preferred method.
I think so. I like that.
But Republicans hate ranked choice voting because, and you're all universally lined up against it for some stupid reason. But it's worked pretty well in Alaska. That being said, so that's problem number one. Problem number two is we're so polarized right now. Granted, the ranks of the independents are growing, but Republicans and Democrats are so polarized right now that focusing on the stuff they focus on actually is to their benefit because it disenfranchises independent voters. So they have a vested interest in keeping and continuing the divisiveness that has become our politics, which is, and politics are always divisive, and I'm not saying otherwise, but it certainly this is the most divisive our politics has been since I started paying attention to politics when I was in like middle school. And a lot of that has to do with problem number three, which is social media.
Oh, absolutely. And it acts as an echo chamber.
Yes. And especially now because so many people are leaving like Twitter and they're joining Blue Sky. Blue Sky is becoming an echo chamber. Like the internet is just this amazing tool that has
Absolutely.
this
Everything
ability
can be used for good or bad.
Yeah, that has this ability to bring us so close together.
Absolutely.
It's amazing that I have done Zooms with people who are in different countries. I have talked to people on the other side of the United States. I have been able to do so much with the use of the internet. But just the same, I have seen people do
Destruction.
Yeah, complete destruction.
Oh, absolutely.
Complete destruction. And, whether it's people bullying people into personal harm or just death threats or whatever the case may be, there is so much bad that happens with the
couldn't
internet.
imagine, I think about it a lot. Thank God they didn't have it when I was a kid. Boy.
Oh, I know.
Especially some of the crap I pulled as a teenager.
Oh, yeah.
Holy shit.
Oh,
Somebody pulling out their phones and getting you into putting in, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Man.
No, I mean, it's just been, it's been wild. People need to go touch grass. I mean,
Well,
like,
that's one of the reasons we did this podcast though, too. It's just that we just need to talk to each other.
Yeah. I mean, look, I hate you,
I know, right?
but I come in here and talk to you every
right.
couple weeks or
I
so
look forward to you
because I'm enjoying it. No, I don't, for people listening, I don't actually hate Bill.
No, I know.
Bill and Denise are both dear friends.
Yeah.
And I just like to
pick.
I just like to give Bill a hard time.
No, I know. That's
And
what
he's
it's
one
about.
of many.
Because he's a communist. I mean, it's
okay.
he reads Marx and he has a picture of Stalin in his office at home that he prays to every night, and
Come on now.
It's just actually I ride around on a bald eagle and
Yeah.
No, but it's and speaking of the two-party system, if people listening want to, the organizations I work for, the first one is called Due Process Institute. We're online at idueprocess.org. The second one may be speaking more to you, which is the Independent Center, and that's independentcenter.org, which is our entire thing is to mobilize disenfranchised independent voters who are tired of the way things are going in the United States.
Mhm.
Like I was telling someone I work with over there the other day, it's like, I need this program to succeed. I need the Independent Center to succeed because I'm going nuts. So anyway, I'm about to get shaved.
Yeah,
So
that's fine. And Emily's probably like, yes, please succeed so you can get him out of my hair.
Well, and
Right.
for you
No, I was kidding.
taking your time to discuss and be on our podcast, we are going to give you a free product.
Oh,
And
sweet.
It is going to be the Statement Dry Clay, which we carry in our shop.
Oh, sweet.
And I think it'll work well for your hair and for your wedding. So I'm going to give that to you.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm looking forward to using this.
Man, that was an awesome conversation with Jason Pye. Always a pleasure when he comes in. And whether we agree, disagree, or just rant about the state of things, it's always real, honest discussion. And that's why we started this podcast, to have these conversations, to bring people together and push past all the noise. Now, speaking of noise, you may have noticed some clipper noise in the background at certain parts, but that's just part of the experience. This conversation happened right here in the shop with Jason in the chair, which is exactly what the Straight Edge is all about. Real discussions in a real barbershop with no filter. So if today's episode resonated with you, keep tuning in, keep the discussions going, and most importantly, let's talk to each other. Until next time, stay sharp, stay bold, and keep cutting through the noise. This has been The Straight Edge, and we'll catch you on the next episode.